In my last video, I argued that the most reasonable interpretation of Milton Friedman's position in his essay, The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits, is as follows. Businesses should increase their profits, but without breaking the law. If you're curious how I arrived at that conclusion, refer back to that video. In what follows, I'm going to proceed with the understanding that this is Friedman's position. What I'm going to do now is consider one of Friedman's arguments for his position. So Friedman's first argument is as follows. What does it mean to say that a business has responsibilities? Only people can have responsibilities. A corporation is an artificial person, and in this sense may have artificial responsibilities. But business as a whole cannot be said to have responsibilities even in this vague sense. So the first thing I want you to note is that this argument goes much further than the claim that businesses only have responsibilities to stay within the law. The conclusion of this argument is that businesses have no responsibilities at all because they are not the sorts of entities that can have responsibilities. So I call this the metaphysics argument against corporate social responsibility because it's an argument that is based on the sorts of entities that businesses are. So in order to assess this argument, we're going to need to express it more clearly. And the business ethicist Sean McAleer represents the metaphysical argument as follows. Premise 1. Corporations are artificial persons. Premise 2. Artificial persons can have only artificial responsibilities. Conclusion 1. So, corporations can only have artificial responsibilities. Premise 3. But moral responsibilities are not artificial responsibilities. Conclusion 2. So, corporations cannot have moral responsibilities. So, according to McAleer, Friedman's argument is not valid. Now, when we say that an argument is valid, what we mean is this. It's impossible for the premises to be true while the conclusion is false. To put it another way, the truth of the premises is or would be a guarantee of the truth of the conclusion. To figure out whether an argument is valid, we don't need to know anything about whether the premises or the conclusion are actually true. All we need to know is whether the conclusion is connected in the right way to the premises. The conclusion would follow if the premises were true. So let's look at some examples of valid and invalid arguments. This argument right here is valid. If it is Friday, then the sky is purple. It is Friday, therefore the sky is purple. This argument is invalid. If it is Friday, then the sky is purple. It is Thursday, therefore the sky is purple. So both of these arguments contain false premises, but the first is valid and the second is invalid. The reason why the first is valid is that it would be impossible for C to be false if P1 and P2 were true. If it were true that it is Friday, and if it were true that the sky is always purple when it is Friday, then it would follow that, therefore, the sky is purple. On the other hand, the second argument is invalid because it is possible for C star to be false, even if P1 star and P2 star are true. Even if we accept that the sky is always purple when it is Friday, we are not able to conclude anything about the sky if it is Thursday rather than Friday. So let's return back to Friedman's argument. So according to McAleer, Friedman's metaphysics argument is invalid because it commits the fallacy of equivocation. So I want to teach you now what the fallacy of equivocation is. So let's look at this argument. People who are blue are unhappy. Sarah is a person who has been painted blue. Therefore, Sarah is sad. So in P1, blue means sad, in the sense of I'm feeling blue because UW-Madison administrators prematurely opened a campus during the middle of a pandemic. But in P2, blue means something different. Blue means has a blue color. So if we fill in the words with synonyms, we'll see that the argument isn't actually valid. Premise 1. People who are feeling sad or unhappy. Premise 2. Sarah is a person who has been painted the color blue. Conclusion. Sarah is feeling sad. So in the argument about blueness, we can see that there's an equivocation about the word blue. It is being used to mean two very different things. It looks like a valid argument, but in this case, appearances are deceptive. Once we understand that the word blue means two very different things, we see that the conclusion isn't connected in the right way to the premises. It is possible for the conclusion to be false even if the premises are both true. So it might be true that people who are feeling sad are unhappy, and Sarah is a person who has been painted the color blue, but we can't conclude from that Sarah is feeling sad. So last, we're ready to return to Friedman. So Michelier alleges that Friedman equivocates about the word artificial. In some cases, the word artificial means non-natural, and in other cases, artificial means non-genuine. So if we take a look at the argument, what we can see is that in the cases where I filled in the words with the color red, we're using the word non-natural. So corporations are non-natural persons. They are these legal fictions. Premise 2, artificial. So non-natural persons can only have, now we use the second sense of artificial, non-genuine responsibilities. And in all the other times, in conclusion 1, and in premise 3, the sense of artificial that's being used is non-genuine, right? So what I want to do now is replace the word artificial with those synonyms and see whether the argument is valid. So here's what we have. Premise 1, corporations are non-natural persons. Premise 2, non-natural persons can have only non-genuine responsibilities. Conclusion 1, so corporations can only have non-genuine responsibilities. Premise 3, but moral responsibilities are genuine responsibilities. Conclusion 2, so corporations cannot have moral responsibilities. I think that in this case, Michelier was actually unfair to Friedman. Although he is correct that Friedman was using two different definitions of the word artificial, when we fill in the blanks, we can see that the argument is valid. However, validity is not everything. As we saw before, to say that an argument is valid is to do no more than to say that the argument has the right connection between the premises and the conclusion. The other thing that matters is whether the premises in the argument are actually true. A sound argument is a valid argument with true premises. So to assess the soundness of Friedman's argument, we need to assess the truth of P1, P2, and P3. P1 and P3 are relatively uncontroversial, so I'm going to set them aside. The real question is whether P2 is true. I'm ambivalent about the truth of P2. While it seems bizarre to me to think about a corporation being the sort of entity that has responsibilities, it seems equally bizarre to me to think of corporations as being the sorts of entities that have rights. Yet, our society has decided that corporations genuinely have rights, including rights to religious freedom. Is it really any more strange to suppose that corporations have responsibilities than to suppose that corporations have rights? At the end of the day, however, the point is moot. Even if P2 is true and businesses themselves don't have responsibilities, we can still ask about the responsibilities of the individuals who work for businesses. In the next lecture, I'll turn to arguments about those responsibilities.